If the economy crashes, these 10 Ontario cities will face the most devastating consequences. But you won't believe which city at number 5 could see its entire foundation crumble overnight. And number 2 will shock you with how quickly everything could unravel. Number 10. Thunder Bay. Thunder Bay sits on the edge of economic disaster, and most people don't even realize it. This northwestern Ontario city has been hemorrhaging young people for decades, but here's what'll grab your attention. Thunder Bay has one of the highest crime rates in Canada, and that's during good economic times. The city's economy desperately clings to its port operations and natural resources. When grain shipments from the prairies slow down, Thunder Bay feels it immediately. The forestry sector, once the backbone of this community, has already taken massive hits. Mill closures have left entire neighborhoods looking like ghost towns. During an economic crash, the remaining resource extraction industries would be among the first to shut down operations. But here's the terrifying reality. Thunder Bay's geographic isolation makes recovery nearly impossible. It's over 700 kilometers from Toronto with limited transportation options. When businesses close, there's nowhere else to go. The population has already dropped from over 120,000 in the 1990s to barely 110,000 today. An economic crash would accelerate this exodus, leaving behind empty homes and abandoned dreams. The city's aging infrastructure desperately needs investment, but where will that money come from when tax revenues plummet? Thunder Bay's future hangs by a thread, and that thread is about to snap. Number 9. Sudbury. Sudbury's entire identity revolves around one thing: mining. And that's exactly why it's sitting on an economic time bomb. This northern Ontario city has built everything around nickel, copper, and other mineral extraction. But here's the hook that'll keep you listening. Sudbury has literally been living off a meteorite impact that happened 1.85 billion years ago. That ancient cosmic collision created the mineral deposits that built this city. But what happens when global demand crashes? We've already seen this story before. In the 1970s and 1980s, Sudbury went through devastating layoffs when metal prices collapsed. Entire families packed up and left. The scars are still visible today. During an economic downturn, mining operations cut back first and cut back hard. These aren't service jobs that can adapt. When a mine closes, hundreds or thousands of specialized workers have nowhere to turn. The ripple effect destroys local businesses, restaurants, and services that depend on mining wages. Sudbury has tried to diversify, bringing in technology sectors and tourism, but the reality is harsh. The city's remote location, 400 kilometers north of Toronto, limits options. When the mining trucks stop rolling, Sudbury's economic engine stops beating. The question isn't if this will happen during the next major crash, it's how quickly the dominoes will fall. Number 8. Sault Ste. Marie. Sault Ste. Marie represents the perfect storm of economic vulnerability, and the warning signs are already flashing red. This border city has watched its steel industry crumble over the past 2 decades, but here's what makes your blood run cold. The city's largest employer, Algoma Steel, has already gone through multiple bankruptcy proceedings. The steel plant employs nearly 3,000 people directly, but supports an estimated 13,000 jobs throughout the region. When steel demand drops during economic downturns, these operations become unsustainable overnight. We've seen this movie before. Pittsburgh, Detroit, Hamilton all experienced the same devastating transformation when their steel industries collapsed. But Sault Ste. Marie faces an additional nightmare scenario. The city sits right on the U.S. border, making it vulnerable to trade disruptions and currency fluctuations. During the 2008 financial crisis, cross-border commerce plummeted, and local businesses suffered. An economic crash would amplify these effects exponentially. The city's population has been steadily declining, from over 80,000 in the 1980s to around 73,000 today. Young people leave for opportunities in Toronto or elsewhere, leaving behind an aging population that struggles to adapt to economic changes. When the steel plant eventually shuts down permanently, and it will during a severe economic crash, Sault Ste. Marie could become Ontario's next Rust Belt casualty. The writing is on the wall and it's written in rust. Number 7. North Bay. North Bay's economic foundation is built on sand, and the tide is coming in fast. This northern Ontario city of 51,000 has been struggling with population decline and economic stagnation for years. But here's the terrifying truth. North Bay depends heavily on government jobs that would be among the first cut during a fiscal crisis. The Canadian Forces-based North Bay employs hundreds of military personnel and civilian workers. Provincial government offices provide steady employment for many residents. But when governments face budget crunches during economic crashes, these seemingly secure jobs vanish quickly. Military bases get consolidated, government services get cut, and entire communities lose their economic anchor. North Bay's geographic location initially seemed like an advantage. It's positioned between Toronto and Sudbury, serving as a transportation hub. But this middleman role becomes worthless when there's nothing to transport and nowhere to go. The forestry industry that once supported the region has already been devastated by mill closures and reduced demand. The city's downtown core shows visible signs of decline. Empty storefronts and abandoned buildings tell a story of economic retreat. Young people graduate from Nipissing University and immediately leave for opportunities elsewhere. During an economic crash, this brain drain would accelerate, leaving behind a community unable to innovate or adapt. North Bay is slowly bleeding out, and a major economic crisis would be the final cut. Number 6. Timmins built its entire existence on gold, and that glittering foundation is about to turn to dust. This northern mining city has experienced boom and bust cycles for over a century, but here's what will shock you. Timmins is more vulnerable today than it's ever been before despite recent mining investments. The city's economy revolves around a handful of major mining operations. When gold prices crash or mining companies face financial difficulties, Timmins transforms from a thriving community into an economic wasteland overnight. We've witnessed this cycle repeatedly. Mining towns explode with prosperity during commodity booms, then collapse just as dramatically when prices fall. But modern mining operations present a new kind of threat. Today's mines employ far fewer workers than historical operations, relying heavily on automation and technology. This means fewer jobs during good times and even more devastating impacts during closures. A single mine closure can eliminate hundreds of high-paying jobs that supported thousands of family members and local businesses. Timmins sits 700 kilometers north of Toronto, making economic diversification nearly impossible. The harsh climate, remote location, and limited transportation options mean there's no backup plan. When the mines close, there's literally nowhere else to go and no other industries to absorb displaced workers. The city's population has remained relatively stable around 42,000, but that stability is an illusion. It's entirely dependent on continued mining operations, and during a severe economic crash, mining companies cut operations ruthlessly to preserve capital. Number 5. Oshawa. Here's where things get absolutely terrifying, and you need to pay attention because Oshawa represents the most shocking economic vulnerability in Ontario. This city of 170,000 people built everything around one company, General Motors, and that foundation is cracking faster than anyone realizes. Here's the hook that'll keep you awake at night. Oshawa was literally known as Motor City North for decades, with GM employing over 23,000 workers at its peak. But in 2019, GM closed its assembly plant, eliminating nearly 3,000 direct jobs and an estimated 12,000 indirect jobs throughout the supply chain. The economic crater this created is still expanding. The plant closure wasn't just about jobs, it was about identity. Entire families worked at GM for generations. Local businesses, restaurants, car dealerships, and service providers all depended on GM wages. When those paychecks stopped, the ripple effects devastated the entire regional economy. But here's what makes this absolutely terrifying. Oshawa hasn't successfully replaced that economic foundation. During the next major economic crash, the remaining automotive suppliers and related businesses would face extinction. The city's proximity to Toronto provides some buffer, but it also means competing with a much larger job market during tough times. The psychological impact cannot be understated. Oshawa residents watched their city's primary reason for existence disappear almost overnight. During an economic crash, the remaining industrial base would crumble, leaving behind a community struggling to find its purpose. This isn't just economic collapse, it's existential crisis. Number 4. Windsor dangles over an economic abyss, held up by threads that are already fraying. This border city of 230,000 has been fighting for economic survival since the 2008 crisis. But here's what'll make your heart race. Windsor has the highest unemployment rate among major Canadian cities, and that's during relatively good economic times. The automotive industry that built Windsor has been systematically dismantled over the past 15 years. Ford, Chrysler, and countless suppliers have either closed operations or dramatically reduced their workforce. The 2008 financial crisis hit Windsor harder than almost anywhere else in Canada, with unemployment reaching devastating levels. Many neighborhoods still haven't recovered. But Windsor faces a unique vulnerability that other cities don't: its complete dependence on the U.S. economy. The Ambassador Bridge carries $100 billion in trade annually, making Windsor incredibly sensitive to American economic conditions and trade policy changes. When the U.S. economy crashes, Windsor crashes harder and faster. The city's downtown core tells a story of decline. Empty office buildings, closed restaurants, and abandoned storefronts create an atmosphere of economic decay. The brain drain is relentless. Young graduates leave for opportunities in Toronto, Ottawa, or even across the border in Detroit. During the next major economic crash, Windsor's remaining automotive operations would face immediate pressure. Cross-border trade would plummet, eliminating thousands of logistics and transportation jobs. The city's casino and tourism industries would collapse as discretionary spending evaporates. Windsor isn't just vulnerable, it's hanging by a thread that's about to snap. Number 3. Hamilton. Hamilton's economic resurrection story is about to become a cautionary tale of devastating proportions. This city of 550,000 has been celebrating its transformation from Steel City to a diversified economy. But here's the terrifying reality. Hamilton's newfound prosperity is built on an incredibly fragile foundation that's about to crack. The city's steel industry, anchored by ArcelorMittal Dofasco, still employs thousands of workers and supports countless indirect jobs. But steel production becomes economically unviable quickly during recessions when construction and manufacturing demand plummets. Hamilton has experienced this nightmare before. In the 1980s and 1990s, steel plant closures devastated entire neighborhoods. But here's what makes Hamilton's situation particularly dangerous. The city has become heavily dependent on Toronto's economic spillover. Housing prices have skyrocketed as Toronto residents move to Hamilton seeking affordability. Local businesses, restaurants, and services have expanded to serve this new population. During an economic crash, this Toronto connection becomes a liability rather than an asset. When unemployment rises and housing values crash, Hamilton would experience a double impact. The new residents who drove recent growth would face financial pressure, potentially forcing them to move again or default on mortgages. Meanwhile, traditional industrial employers would cut operations aggressively. Hamilton's downtown revitalization has been impressive, but it's largely dependent on continued investment and population growth. An economic crash would halt development projects, close new businesses, and reverse years of progress. The city would find itself caught between its industrial past and an uncertain future, with limited options for economic recovery. Number 2. London. Prepare yourself for this shocking revelation. London, Ontario, appears economically stable on the surface, but it's actually sitting on one of the most dangerous economic fault lines in the province. This southwestern Ontario city of 430,000 has built its economy around sectors that become incredibly vulnerable during major economic downturns. Here's the hook that'll blow your mind. London depends heavily on financial services, insurance, and government employment. Companies like London Life, Sun Life, and various government offices provide thousands of jobs. But here's the terrifying truth about these industries during economic crashes. They cut staff ruthlessly and consolidate operations to reduce costs. The 2008 financial crisis provided a preview of London's vulnerability. Financial services companies eliminated thousands of jobs, and the ripple effects devastated the local economy. Office buildings emptied, downtown businesses closed, and the housing market collapsed. London's recovery took years, but the next crash would be even more devastating. The city's manufacturing base has been systematically eliminated over the past 2 decades. Major employers like Ford, General Motors, and countless smaller manufacturers have closed operations or moved production elsewhere. This deindustrialization has left London overly dependent on service sector employment that disappears quickly during recessions. But here's what makes London's situation absolutely catastrophic. The city has limited economic diversification options. It's too far from Toronto to benefit from spillover effects, and it lacks the natural resources or geographic advantages of other regions. When the financial services sector contracts during an economic crash, London has no backup plan. The university and hospital sectors provide some stability, but they cannot absorb thousands of displaced financial services workers. London would face a perfect storm of unemployment, business closures, and population decline that would take decades to reverse. Number 1. Oshawa. Wait. You might be thinking we already covered Oshawa at number 5, but here's why it deserves the top spot. The GM plant closure was just the beginning of Oshawa's economic apocalypse. This city represents the most complete example of economic vulnerability in Ontario, and the worst is yet to come. Here's the ultimate hook. Oshawa's entire supply chain and supporting ecosystem is still collapsing in slow motion. Hundreds of automotive suppliers, tool and die shops, logistics companies, and specialized manufacturers built their businesses around GM production. Even though the main plant closed in 2019, these companies have been struggling to survive by serving other automotive customers. During the next economic crash, this entire network would face extinction. The psychological and social impacts in Oshawa go beyond economics. This is a community that defined itself through manufacturing excellence for over a century. 3 generations of families worked at GM, creating a culture and identity tied to automotive production. When that disappeared, it left an existential void that has never been filled. But here's what makes Oshawa's situation absolutely devastating. The city attempted economic diversification, but most new initiatives depend on continued prosperity and investment. The technology sector, advanced manufacturing, and service industries that Oshawa has attracted would be among the first casualties during a major economic downturn. The housing market tells the real story. Despite proximity to Toronto, Oshawa's real estate values remain depressed compared to similar communities. This reflects underlying economic uncertainty and limited confidence in the city's future. During an economic crash, housing values would collapse, trapping residents who cannot afford to move elsewhere. Oshawa's infrastructure, schools, and public services were built to support a much larger tax base, generated by high-paying manufacturing jobs. As the economy continues to contract, maintaining these services becomes impossible. The city faces a death spiral of declining services, falling property values, and continued population loss. These 10 Ontario cities face economic devastation when the next major crash arrives, but each tells a different story of vulnerability. From resource dependence to industrial collapse, from geographic isolation to over-specialization, these communities represent the fault lines in Ontario's economic foundation. What do you think about these cities? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Which city would you choose to weather an economic storm and why? If you found this video helpful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content. Click on the bell icon to get notified when we release our next video.